You're traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
With those words, Rod Serling began what is now considered one of the most iconic television series of all time. So iconic, in fact, it has been remade as a series 3 times on television and also made into a feature motion picture. Rod Serling was born on December 25, 1924. Encouraged by his parents, Rod would frequently put on plays in his family's basement for family and friends. When he was in high school, Rod began to write for the high school newspaper and had a reputation as a social activist. He was also interested in sports, but everyone said he was too small for the varsity football team. Listening to the radio was Serling's favorite hobby while growing up. He especially loved listening to horror shows while working at a local Binghamton, New York radio station. Although he was accepted into college, Rod wanted to enlist in the service for the war effort after graduating high school in 1943. He was stationed in the Philippines to fight the Japanese, even though he had hoped to fight the Germans in Europe. His battle experiences while in the service influenced his writings and personal views for the rest of his life. Serling was no stranger to death, as he saw it on a daily basis while he was in the service, including a freak accident that killed another private he was stationed with at the time. A food crate had dropped from a plane and landed on the man's head, instantly decapitating him. Serling would later write many scripts using the unpredictability of death as a theme. During his time in the service, he was awarded the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, and the Philippine Liberation Medal. Serling experienced nightmares and flashbacks for the rest of his life, as well as these traumatic events having an influence on most of his writing. Rod would later say that he turned to writing to get it off his chest. Rod began working at a rehab hospital after being discharged from the service in 1946. He'd been wounded in the knee while in combat in the Philippines, and it was an injury that would plague him for the rest of his life. When he finally entered college after the discharge, he quickly became interested in theater and broadcasting. Rod wrote, directed, and acted in radio programs at school while he was earning his Bachelor of Arts degree in literature. Here he met Carol Kramer, the woman that would later become his wife. Serling was also a daredevil of sorts, and he worked part-time while in college testing parachutes for the U.S. Army Air Force. He earned $50 for each jump, and once was paid $500 for a particularly hazardous test jump. He also was paid $1,000 when he tested a jet ejection seat that the previous 3 testers had been killed on while testing. In 1957, Rod wrote a teleplay which he intended to be the pilot episode of his new television series, which he called The Twilight Zone. The episode was titled The Time Element and was initially rejected by the networks, but was picked up a year later and produced as an episode of the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse.
Are you all right?
Oh, sure, I'm all right. Why?
Well, this morning you seemed so sure it was another year.
The show was a huge success and allowed Serling to begin production on his new, untested anthology series. Although Rod Serling himself is remembered as an on-camera presence in the original Twilight Zone, he actually only appeared physically in 1 episode in the very first season. That episode was entitled A World of His Own and was the very last episode of the first season. In that episode, Rod actually interacts with one of the characters in the episode itself.
In real life, such ridiculous nonsense could never...
Rod.
Up until that point, he was present only as a voiceover until the end of the episodes where he would do a preview of the next week's episode. There are many memorable episodes in that first season, including Time Enough at Last with Burgess Meredith, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, Third from the Sun, and The Hitchhiker. Rod himself wrote 19 of the first season's 36 episodes and did the teleplays for another 10 episodes of that incredible season, winning himself his 4th Emmy Award for dramatic writing. The second season of The Twilight Zone saw some production problems come into play, as well as a new theme song by Marius Constant, which would replace the dreamy theme by Bernard Herrmann in the first season.
to another dimension.
This is the theme song that everyone is now familiar with, which contains the unforgettable guitar and bongo theme. Also, a new network executive took over at ABC at that time, and he decided that the shows were running over budget. This new exec, a man named James Aubrey, ordered 7 fewer episodes to be produced and 6 episodes to be shot on videotape to cut costs. 2 other episodes which were filmed in the second season, The Grave and Nothing in the Dark, were also held over for the third season. In the end, the savings only amounted to an average of $6,000 per episode, which was less than the cost of a single episode. Serling again penned 19 of the second season's 29 episodes. Now, an episode entitled The Encounter, which is the 151st episode of The Twilight Zone, is from a story by Rod Serling and a teleplay by an American screenwriter and novelist by the name of Martin M. Goldsmith. It was directed by Robert Butler, who also directed episodes of Batman, Star Trek, and The Fugitive, as well as many other programs of the time. The episode was originally broadcast on May 1, 1964, but due to its racial nature, was banned from the television syndication market until January 1st of 2016, when it was finally shown as part of a Twilight Zone marathon on the Sci-Fi Network. In the episode, George Takei, who is known as Mr. Sulu of Star Trek fame, plays a Japanese-American named Takamori, who is spoken to in a racially offensive way by a World War II veteran named Fenton. It was because of this, and its racial overtones, that the episode was banned from syndication for 52 years. The story centers around a samurai sword that Fenton used to kill a Japanese soldier 20 years previously in World War II. The sword itself has a strange effect on Takamori and seems to have him under its spell. After a scuffle, Fenton, while attempting to retrieve the sword, instead falls on it and dies. Takamori then takes the sword and leaps out of the window to his death. Not one of the more uplifting of Twilight Zone stories. The Twilight Zone was on the air for 5 seasons, from 1959 to 1964, and won many awards, but never had more than modest ratings. So when it was canceled for the 3rd time after 5 years and 156 episodes, Serling, who had grown tired of the series, decided not to appeal this latest network decision. He then sold the rights for the show to CBS, partly because the show frequently did go over budget and he didn't think he could recoup the production costs. Thus ended the original 5-year run of arguably the best television anthology series ever made. In Rod Serling's own words, every man is put on earth condemned to die, time and method of execution unknown. And thus it was with his baby, The Twilight Zone. Thanks for watching.